Hello and a very warm welcome to today's public talk. My name is Karen and I'm one of the volunteers at NECAFLA, the Center for Spiritist Studies Camille Flammarion here in Brussels. Today's reflections focus on a very powerful tool that we all have access to and that can really help us a lot, but that many of us perhaps use very little still, about prayer. Now, prayer, meditation are part of many different beliefs, of many different religions, philosophies. There are many, many different ways to pray. And the benefits of prayer may be looked at from many, many different angles. There are even scientific studies. But what we are going to focus on today is some of the aspects that the Spiritist teachings explain to us, the aspects of prayer. And the idea for us is really to become aware about the benefits that prayer can bring, how it can help us, and how we can help others through prayer. So when we read Spiritist literature, we find many, many examples of the effect that a prayer can have, both examples of incarnate persons and discarnates, where we see that, and really we see that in all of those examples, that every sincere prayer receives an answer. And it's really beautiful to see how the spiritual realms react when someone prays. I love to start with one example that many of you may be familiar with from the book No Solar, or Astral City, which also exists as a film, where we see the main character, André Louis, who in his last incarnation used to be a doctor on Earth, and after he passed away in the spiritual world, after a certain period of time, he's in a position to explain to us what he found there. So what he does is, through mediumistic writing, through the mediumship of Chico Xavier, he tells us what he found when he returned to the spiritual world, how his passage was, and how his life continued there. And what we see in the very beginning is that actually his first years after passing away have been very, very difficult. He has suffered a lot, which was due to the way he had led his life. And he went really through a lot of suffering. And after years of that suffering, he comes to a point where he really is completely exhausted, where he doesn't know what to do anymore, where he just can't take any step further. And this is where he comes to a point where, for the first time after all those years, he remembers how his mom had taught him to pray. And he thinks of God. He asks for help and prays. He doesn't remember for how long. And at that time, a high order spirit from the astral city, which is called No Solar, Clarencio, he appears. André sees him together with other spirits who help him, who take him to No Solar, where he receives help, where he receives treatment, and where he then continues his pathway. And at some point later, he talks about this situation to Lysias, who had actually also been there at that moment when he, after his prayer, received that help. And Lysias explains to him what has actually happened. He said that Clarencio and the other spirits hadn't been there only at that moment after all those years of suffering. They had been there for many, many times trying to help him. But André Louis, as he had been a rather proud person on Earth, he just was not in a position to see that help. And only through prayer, and as Lysias explained it, only through that heartfelt prayer, he changed his vibration. And then he was able to see that help that had been available for a long, long time. And as Lysias put it, he said that the proud earthly doctor recognized that there was something bigger. And that was actually the effect that prayer had. It made all the difference in that situation because André changed his vibration. And both the Spirit's book and the Gospel, who are two of the basic Spirit's book, or the basic books of the Spiritist teachings, they contain a lot of information about prayer. And perhaps we can start with the definition of the general character of prayer that Allan Kardec, who codified the Spiritist teachings, when he prepared the Spirit's book, he asked the higher order spirits also about what is the general character of prayer, for us to have an idea. And the higher order spirits explained to him that prayer is an act of worship. Praying to God is thinking of God, drawing nearer to God, putting oneself in communication with God. Through prayer, we may do three things: praise, ask, and thank. And now when we say that we are establishing a connection with God, if you call God in a different way, it doesn't matter. If you call it God, if you call it supreme intelligence, if you call it the universe, if you have another name, it doesn't matter. It's that supreme intelligence that we establish a connection with when we pray, and we may praise that supreme intelligence. We may ask for something, and I think that's the part where we're all very good at. And I'm one of those who are probably using this very, very much, asking for help, asking for this and that. And also we can use it to thank. And that's something that we should also, well, who am I to explain what is the most important part of, or important part of aspects, but thanking for all the blessings that we receive is never a bad idea, I guess, because that also helps us to become aware of everything that we actually do have. Now, there are obviously many ways to pray, many different forms, and it depends on the tradition that we may have, the way that we learn to pray, and yeah, as we know, there are many different religions. Now, which is the right way? What do the Spiritist teachings tell us about this? And also we find in the Spirit's book, in question 658, an answer to that, where the higher order spirits explain to Allan Kardec, it is important that a prayer is offered from the heart. The intention is everything. So it doesn't matter what form we have, and there's no judgment on that, and it may help us a lot to have our way of praying, our traditional way of praying. What really matters is that it comes really from the heart. What's our intention? The Gospel according to Spiritism dedicates 2 chapters to prayer. Chapter 27, which is a very comprehensive one and gives us a lot of information from different aspects. And we won't have time to touch upon all of them this evening, but I really invite you to have a look at it, because it's really, really interesting. It helps us to understand the topic a bit better, and then also to put it in practice in our own life. And in chapter 28, we find a collection of Spiritist prayers. But going back to chapter 27, perhaps just some aspects that we find there is, one of them is that the power of prayer lies in the thought. It does not depend on the words we use, the place where we are, or the moment that we pray. So it is really possible to pray in all places, anytime. We can pray alone or together with others. Before praying, a very important point that the Gospel also stresses, the Gospel according to Spiritism, but we also find it in the Gospel according to Mark. If we have something against someone else, we need to forgive them first before we start praying. And it's very, if you think about it, that prayer, yes, needs to come from the heart, it needs to be sincere. As long as there is some negative sentiment towards someone, it's really, really difficult to elevate our thoughts, to elevate our vibrations, to praise, to thank for something, or even to ask something for ourselves, isn't it? And often what do? We ask for forgiveness, right? We ask God for forgiveness for something that we did wrong. And it's easy for us to ask for forgiveness because we know our intentions. Often we have the best of intentions. Somehow we fail. And then things went wrong. And maybe that also has happened to the other person that we haven't forgiven yet. So we all, obviously all of us are imperfect. We all make mistakes. And yeah, if you want to really establish that connection with the divine, it's really, really difficult if there's something that we still need to forgive to someone. So That was also the gospel encourages us to do, and to think about that. And how do we want God to forgive us if we are not ready to forgive someone else? Then again, stressing how important it is that a prayer is really sincere, that it comes from a humble position, recognizing our position as imperfect spirits who can't do anything without God's permission. Because we all also know that there's nothing that is outside the natural laws. We can pray for as much as we want, but nothing will go against the law of action and reaction, and against the natural laws. And there's one book that I like a lot when we talk about the topics of thought, of prayer, which is called Thought and Life by the Spirit of Emmanuel. And he has one chapter where he talks about prayer. And I'd only like to quote a small part of that I find very interesting and beautiful, describing what happens when we pray. So Emmanuel says, to pray is to align oneself with the greatest source of power in the universe, to absorb its riches, and to reflect the laws of permanent renewal that govern the foundations of life. And later on he continues, when a person turns to prayer, they touch responsive hearts. Such contact produces reflexes of enlightenment. Through them, the spirit silently receives the influx of the divine messengers in the form of inspiration and inner help. These are the sublime servants who assist with the soul's evolution, renewing emotions and thoughts through which one progresses. The process of prayer is the highest means of interchange between earth and heaven. The highest interchange between earth and heaven. And the gospel, according to Spiritism, has even an explanation of the process of prayer in chapter 27, item 10, which really explains the technical process, what happens when we address a thought to another being, be it God, be it Jesus, be it someone else, where we can see how we establish a fluidic current through our thought, through actually with the help of the universal cosmic fluid that acts as the vehicle of our thoughts. We are able to connect to that being that we address our prayer to. So we don't need to worry if we reach Jesus, or if that spirit that we pray to is far away or busy. We always establish that connection. And the way it works, you can read it in the Gospel, chapter 27. It's very, very beautiful to understand. So to see how we actually establish that connection. And the Gospel also reminds us in that chapter that yes, we can ask for anything, but again, everything, the results of a prayer are always subordinate to God's will, who is the supreme judge of all things. Because as the text also explains us, certain things that we ask for may not be in our own interests, because we only, as the book says, generally human beings only see the present moment, the moment that we are in right now, the life that we are living right now, this incarnation that we have. But we are not in a position to see the bigger picture. The incarnations that we had before, we do not know exactly what kind of trials we need to go through, what kind of lessons we need to learn in these incarnations, and those lessons sometimes can be a bit hard. But if we would understand why we need to learn them, then we would be grateful to have them. So it's what I want to say, and what the text also talks about. And maybe I just quoted from here. So generally, human beings only see the present moment. Meanwhile, if the suffering is useful to our future happiness, then God will let us suffer, just as a surgeon allows the patient to suffer an operation that will cure him. what God will grant if we direct ourselves to Him with confidence is courage, patience, and resignation. So basically, rather than saying, please take this trial of my pathway or this bitter lesson, if this lesson is necessary for us, it will remain, but we will, if we ask for it, receive courage, patience, and resignation. So for us to be in a position to overcome those obstacles, or to go through them, perhaps with a lighter way of walking, and also with a bit more courage and strength. So this help will come if we pray. And then continuing, what He will also grant when we pray are the means of resolving situations with the help of ideas suggested to us by good spirits at God's instigation, whereby we retain the merit for the decisions taken. So we still have, obviously, our free will. We will still have to do our own share, but we do receive help. And I sometimes like to compare this to an electric bike. And now I ask for forgiveness to all of those who are cycling in this big cycling nation here in Belgium, who are cycling as a sport. But I'm talking about those like me who like to go from A to B with the bicycle, and having the challenging and beautiful hills of Brussels. It may help if you have an electric bike. So basically what we need to do is we have to still cycle our own of ourselves, but that tiny motor helps us a bit to get up the hill with a bit less effort, or to make it easier for us. And sometimes in some situations, I think that's what prayer can help us also to go through the difficult situations, to climb that hill. But we get this little bit of wind from the back that can make it a bit more easier for us. So basically what we receive through prayer is the assistance of good spirits who can sustain us in our good resolutions, and who can inspire us some positive ideas and help us, and also really to have this moral strength that we need in order to overcome the difficulties. There's in the gospel there are usually also instructions from the Spirit, and the instructions from the Spirit in that chapter about prayer contain a message by the Spirit called Mono, who has a long text where he explains us how important it is that we start our day actually with a prayer. Well, if we don't have that habit of praying, let it be a meditation or just a positive thought where we thank God for this new day, for the blessing of this new day that we can start, for all the blessings that we receive. And he also, there's one point, just a second, that I would like to share when he talks about prayer. He encourages us to basically pray on a constant basis, but not sitting still and only addressing our thoughts, but as he says, by doing our fulfill our duties, we pray, but also by just being grateful for, in a moment where we receive where something good happens to us, just to say thank you. And also when we make a mistake, to lift our thoughts up and say sorry. I really didn't mean it. And he says, you can be sure that just one of these thoughts, if sent from the heart, is listened to by our celestial Father. And that more than anything that we would just say as a prayer, but really not, which would not come from the heart. So that's what he encourages us to do as well, to just really establish this really sincere connection. And now that I've talked a lot about the benefits of prayer for ourselves, I would also like to briefly touch upon another very important aspect, the prayer for others. intercessory prayers for suffering spirits, or just to support someone. In the book Heaven and Hell, which is also one of the basic books of the Spiritist teachings, in the second part of this book, we find a lot of examples of spirits, discarnate spirits, who tell us about their situation in the spiritual world. And one chapter is about suffering spirits. And all of them, or many of them, who tell their stories, who give their testimonial, at some stage they always ask for prayers, because that's really important to them, and they need prayers to be able to overcome the difficulties that they are in. We're talking about suffering spirits. Because as also the Gospel and the Spirit's book explain us, when we pray for some suffering spirit, first of all, it has a consoling effect, because that spirit feels that someone is thinking of them, that someone is sending positive thoughts, and that they're not forgotten. And then it also has a reanimating effect, because through that positive energy that we send out, we help that suffering soul, that suffering heart, to find the strength to try and get up again and continue their pathway. And that's really something that can have a beautiful effect that we usually cannot see, we cannot feel it, but any sincere prayer addressed on behalf of someone who is suffering does have a very beautiful effect. And also, again, in the Spirit's book, in question 662, we can find some explanation about how that works. Because as Allan Kardec asked, the higher order spirits, may one pray effectively for others? Does it really have an effect? And yes, the higher order spirits tell us the spirit of the one who prays acts out of a good will, or of a will to do good. Through prayer, it attracts good spirits who cooperate in the good it desires to do. So there are good spirits that will then help that person that we pray for. And often we are in a situation where we see terrible things happening, a lot of suffering, and we don't know really what to do, because we're either far away or we can't help all of the people who are suffering and all of those who discarnate in difficult situations. But really, through prayer, we can do a lot to help. Obviously, it's not the only way to help, but this is one way we can help. There's also a beautiful book of messages by the Spirit of Emmanuel. It's called Our Daily Bread. And there's one message which talks about intercessory prayer, where he also encourages us to pray for those who suffer. And as he calls it intercessory prayer, is one of the most beautiful acts of fraternity. Again, as just briefly, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have in chapter 28 of the Gospel a collection of Spiritist prayers for all kinds of situations. If we pray for ourselves or someone else. But as Allan Kardec explains in the very beginning of the chapter, and also all of everything that I said before, that the form is actually not important, but those prayers exist in order to help us, because sometimes it's just easier for us to have a text that we can read or pray in a similar way. But obviously, it doesn't need to be that way. So that's just as a background, but we also find in there. It's just for those of us who prefer to have some inspiration of how could I formulate a prayer. We can find some inspiration here. And also, I will try and share my screen. There is, if you have kids and are wondering how to, well, most of you will know how to pray with your kids, but in any case, there's a beautiful book which is called Learning How to Pray. It was written by our friend Elsa Rossi, which actually is a book that tells about how you can address the topic of prayer with children, and giving some beautiful examples in which situations in life. And I just try to share it with you so you can see how it looks like. Just one moment, please. I'm wondering if that works. I hope it does. So you can see where it is available, both on Amazon as an ebook, and the paperback version is available through the website of the British Union of Spiritist Societies. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And with that, I'm also coming already to an end. Thanking you for your attention, for your patience, and really encouraging all of us to focus on the three aspects that prayer can be: praising, thanking, and again thanking for all the blessings that we receive. Particularly helpful to do that and to have that happen, because we're really becoming aware of how many things we actually do have, and then perhaps it also helps us to overcome the more difficult situation. And obviously also, if we need help, inspiration, that's really a very powerful tool, because sometimes we may be in a situation where we can't see a way out, and I don't really know what to do. But if we pray, if we try to establish that connection, then we may come into a situation where André Louis was at that point in Osolar, where he changed his vibration and was able to see the help that was available. And then if we pray, we may be more open to that inspiration that is available through our guardian angel, through high order spirits who may help. So thanks a lot for all your patience. And just to share with you, that was too quick, where we start with our activities. So we do have, Nick Kafler has activities in French, in Portuguese, and in English. Currently, our activities in French and in Portuguese, some of them are happening at our premises in Saint-Gilles. For example, our public talks in French and in Portuguese. And all the information, all the details of when it happens and where you need to register, especially for the activities in Portuguese, we ask participants to register beforehand, so we make sure not to come over the limit, because obviously it's all done within the current regulations that apply to all of us. So I invite you to go to our website, nekafla.be, nekafla with 2e.be, where you find all the information. What you can also find is the basic books of the Spiritist teachings for download, also in English, and some more information about Spiritism. So thank you very much for your patience, for your participation, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.